from the Illinois State Capitol Connection.
Welcome to Capitol Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell. The campaign to become Senate President entered a new phase this week as Senator Don Harmon, a Democrat from Oak Park, pulled a rather sneaky maneuver, if you will. He loaned himself $100,001, exactly $1 more than the amount needed to qualify as a self-funded candidate. Why is that important? That busts the contribution caps, removing those limits, and allows Harmon to take unlimited contributions until the next election. According to the State Board of Elections, of course, that's March 17th, the primary. But one condition, Harmon isn't on the ballot in 2020. He's not on the ballot until 2022. So how could he qualify to be a self-funded candidate? We reached out to Harmon, and at the time of this taping, we have not yet heard back from him. But we do know that he's ramping up his fundraising efforts as he seeks to take the throne from retiring Senate President John Cullerton. On the other side of this race, Senate Majority Leader Kim Lightford, who started an independent expenditure committee, or a PAC, if you will. She, too, can raise unlimited amounts of money, but it's not in her personal campaign, so she cannot directly profit or gain an advantage from it. Those two squaring off in a fight over votes. That election will be held in the Senate. Both candidates say the other needs 30 votes to clinch the job. That takes place Sunday, January 19th. And on the other side of the aisle, Senate Minority Leader Bill Brady under fire from one of his own members this week, Senator Jason Plummer, opening a public rift and confrontation with Brady over his revenue, his side gig, earning money with a video gaming company.
You shouldn't be in public office in a part-time job and begin making tremendous amounts of money in lines of work you just kind of fall into. Certain legislators are making a lot of money from industries where they have a tremendous amount of influence, and I think that the more the average voter in Illinois paid attention, the more shocked they'd be about what's going on in Springfield. This bill eliminates the opportunity for elected officials and employees of the General Assembly to basically be owners of privately held gaming enterprises or receive consulting or W-2, 1099 payments from those entities. A lot of people were surprised by the news that broke at the end of May, and everyone that I have talked to has been extremely supportive of the general concept. Bill's inclination was to work more closely with the other leaders to maybe take a slower approach and maybe go after, I think in your article, you said low-hanging fruit, and I would say that I believe those were the exact terms he used. I agree that the words video gaming never came up. That's not really how things work in Springfield. What was crystal clear was his intention, and his intention was this legislation couldn't be filed. And his intention was that I couldn't speak publicly about this legislation. And those conditions and those terms weren't placed on the other people who were being appointed to the commission. Those terms and conditions weren't placed on other ethics-related legislation. It was just my ethics-related legislation.
You're saying he basically offered you a position in exchange for your silence?
Yes.
Can he lead the Republican Party in the Senate, given what you've accused him of?
Well, all I did was I declined the appointment. I know Bill's trying to say that I resigned from the commission. That's not what I did.
Do you still want to serve on the commission?
Very much want to serve on the commission. There's a significant difference between resigning from the commission and declining an appointment that was very inappropriate. And I'd love to serve on the commission.
5 House Republicans visited Springfield Wednesday this week and called on Governor Pritzker to convene an emergency special session to tackle the ethical issues. Governor Pritzker said that wouldn't be enough time to tackle it in a comprehensive fashion.
To do a quickie special session, just like doing a quickie veto session to try to get all of the ethics matters covered, doesn't make a lot of sense.
State Senator Dave Syverson, the Republican who had a big hand in pushing the gaming bill through the Senate, joins us next. Stick around.
You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Senator Dave Syverson from Rockford. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Toward the close of the last day or so of veto session, there was a lot of tension, a lot of discussion around the area of whether or not Chicago would get a casino in city limits. You seem to be opposed to this in some way. Why?
Well, opposed to this latest version, certainly Chicago plays a key role, and Chicago needs to have a casino, but we need to make sure that the financing of that casino, the tax structure of that, is one that is fair, that treats everybody in the state the same, and it doesn't negatively affect the state's capital plan that we passed as well.
So Chicago, I believe City Hall in Chicago wanted to try to see lower taxes at the casino so it was more affordable for them, so they would draw more people. How would that negatively impact Rockford?
Well, actually, what they don't necessarily want lower taxes. They wanted lower taxes paid to the state and higher taxes paid to the city. So the amount of taxes would be the same, but Chicago wanted to keep more of it. So as a quick example, in all the other casinos in the state, the local community keeps 5% of the revenue, and then the state gets an average of about 35%. Under this scenario, Chicago, instead of 5%, Chicago would be keeping about 22 or 23% of the revenue, and the state would get half the amount of what every other casino in the state was paying. So it's where it hurts is the state would then get $140 million a year less from Chicago, which that's $140 million that's not going into the capital plan, which affects projects throughout the entire state. So the capital plan loses. Chicago would be paying half the taxes that struggling communities, like Danville and Waukegan and Rockford would be paying. They'd be paying half as much, and then they'd be able to keep 4 times more than what all these other communities keep.
The state and the city are fighting over how they split up the pot, essentially. But it's the same tax rate at each casino, so there's no competitive disadvantage.
Right.
It's
but
just
what
where the money goes.
What we're saying is the tax ought to be the same for everybody because Chicago's going to be the most profitable casino, so they shouldn't be paying half of what every other casino is paying. Pay the state the same as everybody else, and then Chicago can work out their share of the revenue any way they want. Just don't take it away from the state's share.
Give us an outlook on the casino in Rockford. I believe it's your partner, your friend, Rick Nielsen, who is going to be heading up. He owns some portion. What's his ownership stake, or what's his interest in the Rockford Casino?
There's a number of owners in it, and he's got a small percentage, just like I think about 40 other local owners, plus Hard Rock is the major investor. It's really exciting for Rockford. First, to get a Hard Rock name in Illinois is huge. Second, to have Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick as being part of it is going to be great. Their application was submitted. It was clean. Everything was submitted with it. Now the question is whether or not the gaming board is going to act and how long it's going to take. It's disappointing that the gaming board still hasn't gotten video gaming done, but we hope that they will act quickly so we can get a temporary casino opened up.
The local governments had to approve these applications or submit them really to the gaming board. And when a few other developers said, hey, we might want to compete for this share of Rockford and we want to put something forward, you and your office sent a letter to the local governments and said, hey, those other guys aren't really ready yet. This one is. Some people interpreted that as maybe a state senator putting his thumb on the scale there in favor of your friend Rick Nielsen.
Yeah, well, certainly I was in favor of supporting this application for a number of reasons. One is, of the 3 applications that were submitted to the city, only one actually had a contract with the gaming vendor. Only one had locations that were secured and had
the insiders. They were already established. They already had something there.
It was the only application actually submitted to the city that was complete and ready to go. And obviously the city council overwhelmingly supported that as well. Plus, under the law, the casino needed to go where it was going to generate the most revenue, and all the independent studies that are required by the gaming board showed that this location was the best location, and so that's the good news. And I think really the only of all the casinos' applications in the state, Rockford was the one that was united behind one, and only one application was submitted, where other communities had 2 or more.
You weighing in there, though, some people could look at that and say that is the activity that a lobbyist might do, might try to push the city council in a certain direction. Were you lobbying on behalf of that casino indirectly?
And after 15 years of working on this casino, my job was to make sure that it gets done and it gets done right, and we do a proposal that is going to generate the most revenue for the local and for the state, and one that we knew was going to get approved. And so, yes, I certainly knew more about this situation, And so I weighed in on my support. And again, the decision is still made by the city council and by the mayor. But I certainly, both as a public citizen, but also as a senator, very familiar with the rules, weighed in on what I thought was going to be the best for the city. And obviously the city council and the mayor and the business community all concurred with that.
Do you have any business relationship with Mr. Nielsen through a restaurant or?
Well, I have no other ties to the casino in any way, shape, or form. I do know some of the members that are involved in it, and so I have friendships with some of those, just like I had friendships with those, a couple of the other applications that were submitted. I have friendships and relationships with as well. So, but as far as the
do you have any business relationships?
Do I have any? Yeah, I've got some ownership in the Stockholm Inn with Rick Nielsen as one of the owners of that, and so. But again, that's his role in the Hard Rock is he's an investor in it like many others, but again has nothing to do with this application. But the key of this application was what was the best for Rockford, and according to independent studies, the Hard Rock, not only the Hard Rock brand, but this location would generate about $4 million a year more for the city than the other downtown location, which had no even operator. So again, in the end, only one of the applications met the qualifications to be submitted, and only one of the applications was approved. Now, during the process, there was no contact with, the aldermen had no contact with elected officials or others. They had a ban on that, and so.
Why is that?
The city just didn't want aldermen talking to anyone until there was a public hearing, and so there was a public hearing, and then the city council voted. So I never talked to aldermen about about this issue. Publicly, I talked about why this location made the most sense to the state. Mm-hmm. One, because the taxpayers would generate more, and the state would generate significantly more dollars, which is why I'm concerned about the Chicago casino. The goal of this bill is to raise as much money possible for the state and for local government.
We've seen some former lawmakers, House Democrat Lou Lang, a close ally of Speaker Madigan, take a financial interest in the casino in Danville, for example. Is it appropriate for a former lawmaker to benefit financially from a casino that they or their allies helped pass in Springfield? Is that appropriate?
I would certainly have concerns with that, and I think even if it's legal, does it look right? Does it pass the smell test? And those things are a concern, again, which is one of the reasons why, even though it was legally, none of my family, none of my extended family have any ties or shapes or any form.
Or ever will?
Or never will. And so I think it's, that look is something that is a concern, and those municipalities should take that in consideration when they're looking at who they're giving applications to, and then what gets submitted to the state, because it's important that this is above reproach.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Senator Dave Syverson from Rockford, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
We're back in a moment.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We turn now to our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us this week is Cole Henke from our Capitol Bureau and Bruce Rushton from the Illinois Times. Good to have you both with us. We now know why the director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum was fired in September, and that's thanks in part to your reporting. Bruce, we like to spotlight some different and interesting reporting when it comes up. I understand from your story that a handwritten copy of the Gettysburg Address somehow wound up in Texas, and it wasn't exactly treated by museum standards.
No.
In all that process. This is a state treasure,
a national treasure.
A national treasure, quite literally. What the heck happened here, and how did you find out about it?
Well, I found out about it when Glenn Beck, who's the person who had borrowed his organization had borrowed the
conservative radio host.
Yeah, the radio host. press releases went out late last year, late 2018, trumpeting Glenn Beck had donated $50,000 to the Library and Museum and talked about this loan. And I thought, why the heck would the Gettysburg Address ever go down there to begin with? Nobody tipped me off. I just FOIA'd and got a copy of the loan agreement. And under the loan agreement, the Gettysburg Address was sent down there on less than 2 weeks' notice, was put in the care of a woman who was a few months removed as a server at Plucker's Wing Bar. She was the curator down there. It was displayed among a bunch of other stuff like a fake pair of Dorothy's ruby slippers, an exploding rat.
What was this? What kind of a museum or
it isn't a museum.
Display was this?
Yeah, it's hard to determine exactly what it was. It's a nonprofit organization called Mercury One. And so they have some historic artifacts, but on their website they also say, we contribute to humanitarian causes, we're interested in freedom and liberty, and it's a hodgepodge of causes.
And is it Glenn Beck's entity, or who?
It's a nonprofit with him as its head. And so it was a pop-up museum, so to speak. This is an exhibit. It had never before had an exhibit. It had not been accredited by any museum organization.
So it's not quite the Smithsonian?
No. I put it this way. If Elvis had run a thrift store, this is what it would have looked like. Right.
In digging up the details there, it's hard to believe that all that happened. Do we know right now, is the document safe? Has it been damaged in any way?
The Inspector General reported that we were fortunate to get it back undamaged.
All right, quite interesting. I want to move off of that for a moment there. That's a story that we're going to continue to stay plugged into and watching to see what other developments may happen. There's also, you may have heard, a race, a campaign to become the next Senate president in Illinois. This is a spot in a position that hasn't been open for a decade. Senate President John Cullerton announcing last month that he would step down in January. It seems there are two candidates really that have emerged as the top two-tier candidates here. There's Senate Majority Leader Kim Lightford and Senate Assistant Majority Leader Don Harmon. What's the latest there, and is there any read as to which has more support or more of an advantage?
Well, if you're talking support as far as the people supporting the candidate, it seems like Lightford's kind of getting a head start in that. She's got Senator Staines, Senator Menard, the Senate Women's Caucus came forward and showed their support for it. For her, I'm sorry, and
this is the Senate Democratic women, not the Republicans.
Yeah, Senate Democratic women, and
which is a big that's a big chunk.
Yeah. I mean, they have the supermajority in the Senate, and then she has a lot of support from the actual candidates. Now, Senator Harmon, he has the money. Earlier this week, he put in over $100,000, just over $100,000, I believe. I think it was $100,001 in order to break a cap in his campaign financing that will now allow him to bring in unlimited money from outside donors.
And he's not even on the ballot until 2022. Usually you can do this in the year leading up to your election, but he's submitted this document to the State Board of Elections saying, I'm a self-funded candidate leading up to the primary election, essentially, which is in March, but he's not on the ballot then. So the State Board of Elections goes, well, we don't know what to do here. It's sort of untested. Can he legally use that to raise all this money? He believes he can.
Yeah, I mean, and he wrote that law that would allow him to do that, right? And that, like you said, the State Board of Elections is kind of going through untested waters right now. They're figuring that stuff out, and he's playing the cards right now. So it's interesting to see what will happen when it gets to the middle of January there.
Cole, you were just in a cultivation site in Illinois this week. Marijuana becomes legal to smoke, to use, to buy, to consume in Illinois on New Year's Day. It's just less than a month away here now. What was your reporting? What did you see in terms of how they're building out? Do they think they're going to have enough supply to take care of that mad dash, that rush to the cash register to buy marijuana starting in less than a month from now?
They believe they do. They honestly don't know. When I asked that exact question to them, I said, what are you expecting? Do you think we will have enough when it gets to these first few months? And they said, they described it as the $100,000 question. I think it's a little bit more money than that. When it comes down to it, I think there's a little bit more at stake there. But the place I went to is grown. It's a 75,000 square foot facility that 2/3 of it can produce marijuana. The other part is for processing and other things like that. So they said about 80 to 100 pounds of product a week, and that can vary pretty much. But
that's a lot of ounces.
Yeah, no, that gets up there. So then
some gummies, yeah.
Yeah, so when you, when you get when you get that going out, and they've been producing for a while now. Ascend Illinois is the company that owns that facility. They bought it in January to supply their medicinal dispensaries that are under that same parent company. One of them is HCI Alternatives here in Springfield. And when the adult use was legalized, they shifted and really started to ramp up production to get ready for that. What I found interesting about it, I mean, obviously the state has been talking, like regulations are huge around this product right now, but the security measures around that whole building were really, really fascinating to see. Every room was locked by like a key code. Somebody had to scan me to get into every room, including the bathroom. And you had to wear all sorts of protective gear. I wasn't allowed within like a foot of the plants pretty much. And they had security cameras all over the place, but it wasn't just there, people watching them. They said state police had somebody live looking at their feed the entire time to make sure that they were following these regulations that were in place.
Under very close surveillance.
Yeah.
A new industry, quite literally, in Illinois, taking off, and you both saw it from the ground floor, at the ground floor.
So to speak, yeah.
All right. Well, Bruce and Cole, thanks for joining us. There's still a lot of reporting on these next few weeks that remain here in 2019 before we turn the page to 2020. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back. That does it for us this week. Thank you for joining us. We'll hope you'll be right back here again next week on Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell.